And all right, I'm live. It's the Nazarite bringing you Hebrew lore from days of yore. In this week's Torah portion, we basically have tomorrow, the seventh day of Passover, where it's all about the Exodus and the parting of the Red Sea. And a day later, we have what in foreign nations is a second day of holiday, but in the land of Israel, it's a regular Shabbos where we read the Torah portion Aharei Mot, dealing with everything having to do with the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. So I want to touch on a few things, maybe one thing. We'll see. It's almost time to get ready for the seventh day of the holiday here, so I don't have that long a time, but I want to say a few things. So the main thing that happens in tomorrow's Torah portion, read on the seventh day of Passover, is the actual Exodus and the parting of the Red Sea. After 3 days, that when they had already gone, Pharaoh receives intelligence that, you know what, man, they're not turning around and coming back. So after 3 days, he said, okay, so let's go after them, seeing as how they're not turning back and coming back to Egypt. So he goes over there. So they left for 3 days. He pursues for 3 days. On the seventh day, tomorrow, in the morning, that is when, traditionally rather, that is when the parting of the Red Sea happened. There are many teachings having to do with the parting of the Red Sea. It's really worth looking into on any level of analysis. It's an amazing thing. And again, you can take this figuratively or literally. There are some people who say that the parting of the Red Sea never took place and that the people of Israel never actually made it out of Egypt, and that it's all just mythology or folklore, or I don't really know the difference between the two in this context, but something to that effect. And then there are those, like me, who think it's both. I think it is a tradition and, to some degree, folklore, but that it also actually happened. I do believe that there was a people who left Egypt many years ago and who parted the Red Sea, right? Moses parted the Red Sea. The thing with parting the sea is that it was a combination of Moses and God working together, where Moses was the one who acted and God brought the wind, and it parted slowly but surely, and then in the morning they were able to cut through. So there's a very famous bit that I want to talk of now, where God tells Moses, this is not the time for prayer. I forget the precise verse and I wouldn't know it in English offhand, but he says, don't cry out to me, talk to the children of Israel and have them go forward. And you take your staff, lift it up and part the sea, and they will go in the middle. Prayer is an amazing thing, and it has a place in everyday life. I try and pray every day. I think I do pray every day, and not necessarily out of a prayer book, but my spontaneous prayers are never ending. I'm always in a dialogue with the Most High. And there's a bit there where our sages teach us that Moses was praying, which is why in the scripture it says, don't pray to me, go and part the sea and have them go. Now is not the time for prayer. There is a time for prayer, there's a time for action. You can do them simultaneously, but know the difference. And I think that it's an amazing teaching. The fact that now is not the time for prayer. Now you need to actually physically move and do it. You need to lift your hands. They are going to have to go in. Another teaching says that the water did not part until it was up to until they couldn't take it, until it was up to their necks. It was a leap of faith. Or a walk of faith, a march of faith, if you will, at least according to some teachings, until it actually parted. They had to believe that the sea is going to split. They had to go in there when it was still a sea, and only, maybe not at the very last minute, but, metaphorically speaking, at the last minute when it was up to their necks, that's when the sea parted. When it was already all they could do for themselves, and God went in there and gave it the extra push, the kicker of actually parting the sea. There's another teaching that says that it was Nachshon ben Aminadav of the tribe of Judah that actually went in first. There were groups saying that we should turn back to Egypt. There were groups saying that we should just sit and pray. There were groups saying that we should turn around and fight the Egyptians. And Nachshon ben Aminadav did not do any of those things. he went in first. That's according to the external teachings. He went in first, and it was he who, in his wake, all of them went in, and the sea was parted. Even if you simply take it as it was parted and then they went in, that works too. There was something there that had to do with nature and overcoming nature and working, um, bending the will of nature and of natural occurrences to the whim of the Israelites and of Moses. God brought a desert wind, if I'm not mistaken, which blew very hard and fast, presumably, and that caused a kind of rip in the water's surface. I'm not a marine biologist or marine scientist, nor am I a wind or desert scientist, but I know that it's my opinion that for most, if not all, of the miracles that happen in the scripture, in Torah, most or all of them do have a way of corresponding with nature. Even if you're talking about bending the laws of nature to a degree, I believe that's permissible. I think that there is a creator to the world who also created order and chaos and nature being a balance of those two. And at his will, right, at the will of the creator, nature can bend. So we call things miracles, but it's simply God maybe emanating differently from a different sort of spiritual channel, causing a different kind of effect in the physical world. Hang on. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say about that. Right. After the parting and the crossing of the Red Sea, Egypt follows, and the Egyptian military is, well, it drowns in a very dramatic and spectacular kind of way. And it says again in a different teaching that the Israelites were seeing the angel, right, representing the spiritual force of Egypt wrestling and grappling with the spiritual force of Israel. And there is there to a certain extent, everything that happens here has already happened in the spiritual world, and things that happen here affect the spiritual world. It's a symbiosis of some kind, and I won't get into it now, but we affect and are affected, and things have a way. That's why we are humans, body and soul. It's that kind of thing in one. And the idea of having the spiritual fight go on alongside the physical fight is very fitting. There is, after the crossing, after the Egyptians have drowned, the children of Israel burst into song. Moses and the children of Israel burst into song, a very long and beautiful poem. Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but emotionally speaking, it must have been a beautiful thing, even though people died. And yet another teaching says that the Almighty himself was crying, so to speak, when or was it crying? Or no, it was there were angels which wanted to sing since it was their duty, and he said, "My children," meaning Egypt, "are drowning in the sea, and now you're singing." So the angels did not sing, and afterwards, after all was said and done and Israel had crossed, then they burst into song. And after the song, it was Miriam, Moses' sister, and the women who went out and danced with instruments of music, and there was much rejoicing. The idea of giving thanks, giving praise. I mean, Moses, at some point when he's about to part the sea, and he says, God will fight for you. You need to be silent. And that goes back to now is not the time to pray, now is the time to do. But there have been people over the years, I've met some of them, who have had this kind of attitude towards a lot of things where God will do my fighting. I need to be silent. Not in the sense of doing, in a passive sense. I never took it like that. I think that we have to be active. And I think that we have to keep pushing our limits, personally on what it is we can do, playing with our edge, as David Data says in The Way of the Superior Man in the book, that you always need to be playing a game with your edge, with your comfort zone, so to speak. And Israel played a game with that comfort zone, going into the sea and parting it. It was a walk of faith. They had no idea when or what will happen. you had to have faith, a lot of it, to go through. Even after seeing all of the plagues, and even after a few days of freedom, when that Egyptian army comes up behind you and you have the sea in front of you, it takes a lot. It takes a lot from your soul, your spirit, to overcome that physical panic which may arise, that anxiety, that terror that grips you. If you have an army coming at you of the largest empire, I think, at the time, a large empire nonetheless, even if it wasn't the greatest at the time, and I think it was, you have the army come in here, the sea over here, what do you do? And so they went for it. And Moses says, God will fight for you. You need to be silent now, and you need to keep moving. And don't worry about that. You're seeing Egypt now, and you will never see them the same way again, which is true. We never saw them the same way. I mean, Egypt and Israel now have a peace treaty, and people go there and come here, etc., but it's not the same. So now I want to speak only for a couple of minutes on the Torah portion Saturday, 2 days from now, Aharei Mot, which deals with the Day of Atonement, the day of Yom Kippur, a holiday of atonement. It's my favorite holiday. It's a holiday of fasting. It's the only fast of rejoicing and not of mourning, if I'm not mistaken. In the Hebrew calendar, it's the only one where it's a fast which is joyous. It's not meant to break the physical body. It's meant to elevate it in a very, very clear and profound way. Different fasts, which are for mourning and for tragedy and woe, which have occurred, those are fasts of sadness, where we fast in order to repent by sort of breaking a part of our physical routine. But the fast of Yom Kippur, of the holiday of atonement, is not meant to break the body, but elevate it. Well, both of them are meant to elevate it, but this is done in a way of happiness and joy and love, and not in suffering. And I think learning from love and growing from love has different properties and attributes than growing from suffering and pain and tragedy. Both of them happen. Sometimes they happen in different facets to the same individual at the same time. People are complex. The differences between all the other fast days and the fast of atonement, the day of Yom Kippur, is that it's a day where, if you look at it from the outside, it's as if you can act like a piece of crap all year, and then in one day, one fast, everything is atoned. It's not even a whole month like Ramadan, It's one day, one very holy, very special, very sacred day, where very specific divine revelations come into the world, and we then create the vessel with our fast and other customs having to do with the day, and the things that went on in the tabernacle and the temple, in order to harness them and use them. But it's never the case that you can be a piece of crap human all year, and then in one day say, oh, okay, I'm going to do this and everything will be fine. Provided that's what you said. If you throughout the year say, I'm going to be a bad person and do things that are wrong, and then one day I will atone, that one day, or on my deathbed, or all that, it doesn't count as much, if at all. I wouldn't know such things. So the Day of Atonement is a day where only the high priest does the actual work. He has others that help him. For instance, when he slaughters one of the animals, of the animal sacrifices, someone else finishes the job. He just does the initial cut. Someone else finishes the job. When he has to mix different sorts of blood together and put them on the different altars, or the altar and, anyway, the golden altar, where the incense was burned, someone else stirs the blood so it does not clot. So there are many different things going on in this day. All of them have to do with the high priest. The high priest is a representative of Israel and of the Hebrew people. So I just want to say, now that we have no temple and now that we have no high priest, we all, to a degree, whether Israelite or Gentile, we all have the responsibility of being our own high priest, of atoning for our own sins. When Nietzsche, right, said God is dead, he didn't mean he's dead and that's it, let's do whatever we want. I think he meant, and I didn't read the whole thing, but I know that bit, that now is the time where we need to discover our divinity. Now is the time that we need to become gods in the wake of everything that was going on at the time. And emancipation and the secular sort of Well, let's not get into that. God is dead, right? The Catholic or Christian God or the Judeo-Christian God, however he meant it, he meant now we need to be our own high priests. Now we need to be our own gods. Now we need to be our own atoners. The high priest would atone for the sins that had to do with the temple. The high priest atoned for everything that was done that year, whether it was himself and his house, his fellow priests, or all of the children of Israel. Now you could say, isn't that a cop-out? Doesn't that give you the opportunity to be a real piece of junk and then just use that one day in order to say, oh, I'm sorry, and everything will be fine? Well, I don't know how it was at the time of the temple, but now that certainly doesn't fly, and I'm pretty sure it didn't fly back then too. We need to be good people. And I think that the Day of Atonement is all about put the past behind you temporarily, get on with your life in a better way. And when you are ready, you will have the responsibility to go back and face those demons and those skeletons. Don't think for a second that you're atoned and that's that, which is why there's an evening prayer, which is said every evening. And in one of the bits there, one of the parts there, it talks about how we have sinned. And this evening prayer is uttered right after the sundown, or rather when the stars come out on Yom Kippur, right? You fast the whole day. There's a lot of praying, a lot of meditation, a lot of focusing your energy, right? And elevating your body, and you are pure. You're free of sin. In that moment, in that day, when that sun goes down and that horn, the shofar, blows, you're free of sin at that moment, and yet you still, seconds later, pretty much, say, I have sinned, please forgive me. How can that be? Even though what could possibly have taken place between the final prayers of Yom Kippur and the opening prayers of the following day, which start in the evening? Minutes. It was literally seconds of a difference. You start a new prayer, and yet we say that we've sinned. Why? Sinning, missing the mark, right? Sinning is an archery term, missing the mark, not behaving the way you should be, that you should be, that's something that is human. To err is human, right? To forgive is divine, something like that. To err is human. To forgive yourself and others, right, is divine. It means that we need to constantly keep forgiving ourselves for our misguided ideas and notions and actions. And I'm not saying that because I believe in some sort of original sin and that we're all bad to begin with. No. Not like that. Not in the Catholic sense of we are born in sin. Not that kind of a thing at all. It's just human nature. And on Yom Kippur, the high priest represents everyone. And we now need to be our own high priests. So we say that even seconds after Yom Kippur ended, we say we have sinned because we're talking about everyone here. And human beings are fallible by nature. It's part of who we are. We need to get over it. We need to establish ground rules and principles and pillars of faith and of conduct in order to better ourselves, but things will never be perfect. Yom Kippur is a wonderful and amazing day. It's my favorite holiday, and I don't know how much I spoke of it now having to do with the Torah portion, but it happens once a year, one day, where the high priest only can enter the holiest of holies and put incense next to the Ark of the Covenant. It's an amazing day, and I still treat it as a path to many abilities. Really. Let's have a wonderful seventh day of Passover. Let's have a wonderful weekend. God bless. Let's be good.